Hello again and welcome back. Now, many students panic when it comes to submitting a piece of work, afraid that they might be accused of plagiarism. But plagiarism's not like a disease that happens to you, it's something that you actually do yourself. You copy the words and ideas of someone else without attributing the source. If you don't do that, then you haven't plagiarized. But since it's pretty scary, I usually start a class with this video prepared by the University of Bergen in Norway. If you use it, don't panic, it does have English subtitles. Now, if you've been working well, then your draft consists either of your own notes or materials that you've copied and pasted. In both cases, you've done so with the source attached. Now, if in your notes you've transcribed anything literally, make sure it's indicated in some way, either by highlighting it or putting it between inverted commas. And your copy and paste elements should also be highlighted. Now, plagiarism is intellectual theft, and it takes four forms. You might present someone's work as your own. For example, you might buy an essay or copy someone else's assignment. You might use someone else's words instead of your own. For example, you might copy a whole sentence intact, or even an apt phrase and present it as your own. You might present someone else's ideas as your own. You might follow the logic of a whole paragraph, even if it is in your own words, and present it as your own. And finally, you might present someone's sources as your own. For example, by copying the footnotes from the original, but without having read the sources yourself. Now, when we talk about presenting work as your own, we mean that the source attribution is not placed in the text. Putting it in the bibliography is not enough. And putting it in the text is not enough if you're not using your own words. You indicate that you're not using your own words by placing whatever it is in inverted commas. Now, the obvious way to avoid plagiarism is to write it yourself. You should put your own ideas in your own words, and those of other people as well. Now, if you do this, you'll never plagiarize. The odd couple of words that'll randomly appear somewhere will never count against you. And if you want to use other people's words, then you should quote them. And when you quote, you use the exact words used by the author, and you show this by placing it in inverted commas. Now, there are three ways in which you should consider, or three circumstances in which you could consider quoting. You should quote, for example, when you require absolute accuracy. For example, it's common to quote relevant parts of treaties or legal judgments. You could also consider quoting for impact. For example, the author has captured a particular event or situation in a very striking way. And finally, you could quote for atmosphere. For example, you might capture in a few sentences the aftermath of a terrorism act or the first impression on reaching a disaster site. Now, when you quote, you need to refer to the exact page or pages from which you're quoting, or the exact paragraphs of a treaty or a judgment. For the rest, annotating the text shouldn't prove a problem. In fact, if you've been following our advice, you've been doing it already. You should have been putting the author and the year into bits of draft text as you've been writing it. Now, these are your annotations, and they're known as in-text annotations because they appear in the text themselves. And as long as you do this consistently and in the same way throughout, there's no problem. Now, a second approach, which I don't really recommend for a short piece of work, is known as out-of-text notation, or more commonly footnotes or endnotes. You need to do this when your annotation's too long to fit neatly and unobtrusively in brackets in the text. This is usually the case with archive footnotes used by historians or legal references used by lawyers. Out-of-text notation is also often used in books, but that's usually at the insistence of the publisher rather than the choice of the author. So, all that's left then is to make up your bibliography with the sources that you have used. Now, these are in alphabetical order of the surname of the author, followed by the initials, the year of publication, and then the article or book title. And if you've been copying these from the Cite option in Scholar Google as you went along, you've already done it properly. So there we are then, the alternatives of hell or heaven. In Bruegel's fascinating triptych of the Garden of Heavenly Delights occupies the middle frame. The middle frame is a garden of beauty and temptation. The sinners will repent in hell. The sin of plagiarism is deceit. But most plagiarists are not deliberately deceitful. Mind you, some are. The sin is often one of laziness or carelessness. But the result is the same. Now, it takes a lot of time to check a piece of work for plagiarism. So we don't have to prove that most of the work was plagiarized. It's enough to demonstrate that any of the work was plagiarized, and it's your responsibility to make sure that it isn't.